In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have you noticed how sometimes ideas come together? You start thinking about this or that, and then someone else mentions it to you, and suddenly it feels as though everything's come together. For me, this week, it's all been about healing. I've been talking about when and how we might restart the healing ministry in the benefice. And at our Ask service on Wednesday, the Gospel was about the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. That healing, which Luke puts at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, is told in a mere 4 verses, almost as an aside. But Luke does tell us that Jesus rebuked the fever, which made me wonder what kind of an illness it might have been, as the language of rebuke is often used for describing cases of possession. And then today, we have 2 further miracles of healing. Now, there's no doubt in Mark's mind, but that the first of these definitely was a case of possession. The little girl, he said, had an unclean spirit, and the demon needed to be cast out. However, Jesus' approach is very different from going to mother-in-law, speaking to her and to the fever. Jesus doesn't speak to the little girl at all. In fact, he doesn't even meet her. The only words he speaks are addressed to her mother, and those are really quite disturbing. He calls her a dog. But she doesn't seem to care what he calls her. She's a mother fighting for her child's life with the only weapon available to her, her heart. Remember, in last week's Gospel, we saw very clearly that for Jesus it was what came from the heart that mattered. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile. The things that come out are what defile. Whatever Jesus' first and very human reaction to this pushy woman who has intruded on his privacy and broken all the rules about who was allowed to talk to whom, his divine insight showed him that only good was coming out from her heart. Love for her daughter, belief that Jesus could heal her, and the courage to make him listen, whatever that took. And I find it really interesting that this conversation comes immediately after last week's discussion about purity. This woman was unclean on several counts. She was a Gentile. In fact, she lived in Tyre, which was the Old Testament epitome of unfaithfulness and pride. She would, of course, have become personally unclean by caring for, by touching her daughter, and she should never have approached a rabbi in public in the way she did. But clearly, there was no man to speak up for her. She is challenging traditional ideas in much the same way as Jesus has just done. In this case, countering any reluctance to engage with her by implicitly reminding Jesus of the command, also in Isaiah among other writings, to learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. No wonder Jesus accepted the logic of her argument, and he accepted it with grace. I wonder, was there a smile on his face when he told her, for saying that, you may go, the demon has left your daughter? And it appears that she went, without a word or a backward glance, confident that Jesus would do what he had said. The second healing in today's Gospel is very different. We're not told whether the man was a Jew or a Gentile, but then We've just seen that this no longer matters. Jesus will heal both. What is important is that the man is in need, being both deaf and having a speech impediment. In contrast to the long-distance healing of the little girl, here we have an intimate encounter involving touch and saliva. Saliva was thought to be healing. Now, I don't know, but given the purity laws, I imagine it may not have been used often, which is perhaps why it was worth recording. And I wonder too, though I have no evidence for this, and feel free to ignore me, whether this healing is included here, again, because of that linked purity. What I do know is that many people regarded physical infirmity as a punishment for sin. The man would probably have been on the margins of his community, unable to work or support himself, perhaps even excluded from the synagogue. It's not just his ears and mouth that are opened as a result of his encounter with Jesus. It's his way back into society. So, what do these 3 stories of healing have to teach us? Firstly, they all happen as a result of someone else's intervention. Peter's mother-in-law was brought to Jesus by her family, the girl with the unclean spirit by her mother, and the man by persons unknown. All we're told in his case is that they brought him, and later that they were astounded. Whether the person is brought physically or by petition doesn't matter. Nothing, as St. Paul reminds us, can separate us from the love of God and from his power to heal. The ministry of prayer for healing has a long and honourable tradition and binds us to God and the person we're praying for, wherever we may be. Secondly, we see the importance of faith and trust and persistence. We should never stop praying for healing, which leads me also to the fact that healing doesn't always come in the way we expect. My experience of healing ministry and my years as a hospice chaplain have taught me that. It may come with or without words, with or without touch, with or without an audience, in this life or the next. We can only ask God to heal. It's not for us to tell him how, or indeed who. And then there's the response. In these 3 examples of healing, the responses are all different. The Gentile woman did as she was asked. She went home. The man spoke. And wouldn't you love to know what he said? But they, his anonymous companions, ignored Jesus' request to tell no one and proclaimed the miracle to the world. To be honest, I'm not surprised. How could they not share that good news? And Peter's mother-in-law, we're told, immediately got up and began to serve Jesus and those who were with him. Apart from gratitude, of course, there's probably no correct response to healing. We respond according to our nature, out of our hearts, to use again the language of last week's Gospel. And if our hearts tell us to share our experience of God's healing love, well, maybe that's also an argument that Jesus is happy to lose.